You're listening to Three Makes Baby, a podcast about fertility, family, and genetics. I'm Jana Rupnow, a fertility counselor and author of Three Makes Baby. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to Three Makes Baby podcast. Today, my guest it's very special because you may have read about him or even seen him in the news. I have David Berry here with me today.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. I hope someone maybe has seen it, but I'm not placing my bets on that.
Your story has come to light and you've been able to go to public with it and tell people, both the New York Times and the Washington Post, and then tell me what else you were mentioning, what else you've been on, and then what's coming up for you.
Sure. So I was, the other one that I know we were talking about was Good Morning America, which is, it's cool to say that you were on Good Morning America. I wish it were for different reasons, but down the pipeline, or well, actually, no, I shouldn't say that, because I think there's the opportunity for good to come from it. And that's a big part of my current investment. And the other article that's, or story that's going to run and has not yet is going to be on Nightline. So also on ABC. And we don't have an air date yet, but I'm excited about that one because it'll be longer form and a little bit more of the narrative, which I think is really important to understanding people in situations like ours, and the need for legislation more specifically. I think a lot of people are surprised that fertility fraud, which is a big part of my story, that, as of yesterday, I guess there are 9 states that have legislation, but there are 41 who don't. And that's a surprise to a lot of people.
Okay, so maybe we set the hook, and by letting people know right from the beginning that you have been in the news and that your story is newsworthy and very, interesting, and people want to know about it and learn from it. And I'm really sensitive to the listeners because so many are parents, and I hear them like, "Oh no, another story of something going wrong." I have to start out by saying this. So important. Mm-hmm. I consider, Dave, your story and you to be a success story, a happy story. Put all the labels you want. It doesn't really matter what we call it. The fact that you're talking about this and you're showing your face and you're sharing your story is freaking incredible.
I appreciate that.
The courage it takes, and the fact it shows your resiliency, your confidence, your inner strength. So, as you're listening out there going, I can't hear another bad story, I really, really want you to kind of flip the script on this and look at this as an incredible story. But how proud of your child would you be if they were able to come out with their story, talk about it in order to make the world a better place? So there, preaching over. Right. I'm done with that. But you know what I mean? Like, I really want people to start seeing this in a different light. We're not here to talk and harp on the bad things. We're not here to make anybody feel bad. This is about making, a practice and a way of growing your family. It's about making it better.
I think it's a great segue for, what I know we originally discussed, and that is to say, life in general is challenging, right? Like forget for a second anybody who is the product of a unique creation, we'll say, that you come here in the quote unquote conventional way. Like, life is still going to throw you a number of curveballs, and rarely do they come with a benefit to them. And I think, perhaps what you're alluding to, or at least how I'm interpreting it, is I have a lot of side benefits to my story. And you're right. There is negativity to it. There are darker sides to it. But again, I think that's life. Big part of it comes down to, number one, it's unique. And maybe that's why people kind of raise it up the flagpole of negativity. When in fact it's part and parcel. It's just a little bit different than what people, normally face in challenges. But, well, I guess instead of talking around it, I'll kind of dive into it. So I took one of the commercial Ancestry.com DNA tests the way a lot of people have. And this would have been, or actually I ordered it on Christmas of 2016 at my sister's then boyfriend, he's now her husband, his house for Christmas dinner. And it's funny the way that I recall it, because I'm from a city in New York called Rochester, which is way in the western part of the state, and from a town called Greece, not the country Greece, but spelled the same way. Mm-hmm. And in this specific town, there's great civic pride if you're an Italian American. It's just a really big deal in that part of our town. So as it happens, my sister's, then boyfriend, he's telling the story about a friend of his who very big and proud of, his Italian heritage, takes the ancestry.com DNA test, comes to find out he is Irish. He is very, very Irish, no Italian blood at all.
Uh-huh.
And he has the Italian coat of arms tattoo, like on
Oh
his
no.
shoulder,
Oh
like all
no.
of it. Just totally derailed this kid. And I thought it was
Oh
hilarious. I
yeah.
thought it was really funny. So in my own family, I was there, with both of my parents, and my father's father. So I guess my paternal grandfather passed away when he was, I believe, maybe 41 years old. So very, very young. And my father was 7 years old when his father passed. And so as a result, my last name is Barry. I don't have a ton of history on that side of my, or I guess the name lineage that I have, even though the name is not so uncommon that you couldn't Google and get some guesses. But anyways, I heard of this kid's story, and I thought it'd be funny if I, got an ancestry.com test, but it would help me fill in some of those. And then I'll fast forward through, some of the drama, I guess. But the first part was when the results came back in March, and the results just didn't make sense. Funny enough, this is very similar to this guy. So my father's side of the family, his mother is Italian, to the best of my knowledge, was born in Italy, and his father was probably British or Irish. Neither of those things showed up, in my results. Okay. And there were, several rationalizations that I did make at that point in time. And I just, reasoned it away that who knows, maybe my grandmother was born in Italy, but maybe she wasn't Italian, maybe her family had come from somewhere else. But at the same time, there was a person who I'd never met or heard of who was a very high DNA match for me. It said she could be an aunt, a first cousin, or a half sibling. Okay. And so I had, obviously an interest in something like that. I imagine most people who discover that would. And I sent her a message, and she had told me that she was donor conceived, and that she was, she was on the site essentially to look for a little bit about her biological, origin. And I guess in a similar sense to how I was. And so in my mind, I immediately go to, I guess, an Occam's razor, this, principle in philosophy that the simplest explanation is usually.
Is usually the right one. Yeah.
All right. Thought, right.
And so you thought, yeah. What would the simple explanation be?
It's a good question. Yeah. For me, the simple explanation was I had an uncle who got out of the military in the early mid 80s and struggled to get on his feet. So it crossed my mind, all right, if she's conceived through a sperm donor and we're related through presumably the sperm donor, then maybe my uncle is her biological father.
Got it.
And so I sat with that and I proposed it to her, and, my parents seemed oblivious or disinterested, which was confusing to me, but whatever.
Oh, that's common. That's a common story I hear. They seem disinterested or blow it off, kind of brush it off.
Right. And because my parents, we'll put it this way, their reaction was not altogether surprising to me, given what I thought was possible. They didn't want to disrupt, that side of the family. And I understood that. And then fast forward, another 6 months, I can't totally remove myself from this rabbit's hole of research and explanations. And this girl and I, we agreed to upload our raw data to, I want to say the website was GEDmatch, GEDmatch.com, that would allow us to see if it would allow us to see if we shared maternal or paternal DNA, which we were pretty sure.
Really?
Yeah. We'll have to.
That's pretty cool. I didn't know that was a thing.
It's a very basic looking website, but it's really valid. And it actually allows you to see, at least comparing to other people, which segments of your 23 chromosomes you share with another person. It's very interesting.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's pretty good. I mean, it's pretty like solid science.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's solid science. It'll take the raw data export commercial DNA site, which is an important part of our story as it happens, because before we could even go down, the details of that DNA, uniqueness, if you will, we found ourselves another match who was basically a similar match to ourselves, a gentleman. And we did, some DNA, if you will, on Google, and discovered that all three of us were born within 11 months of each other, and all from Rochester, New York. So I had a conversation with my parents again that night, letting them know what I discovered. And then the following night, I got a phone call from my father, who all of a sudden seemed to know a lot more about this than I had anticipated.
Oh
And
gosh.
yeah, that he explained to me in that conversation that I was conceived through a donor. And I knew a very important part of my parents' story, which was they had tried for 5 years to conceive naturally.
Okay.
That I knew. The part that they left out was perhaps the most significant one, and that was
Yeah.
they did not conceive naturally. They ultimately ended up, needing the help of a sperm donor to start their family.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I had, I think, the expected emotional reactions to something like that. It was a few days before my 33rd birthday, and it was very emotional, but something that never crossed my mind. And maybe to tie back to what you were saying of like stories generally being happy, um, I was happy. In fact, I was, despite the tears that I had in great volumes over those first couple of weeks, I was reminded in something that most people maybe don't spend time really thinking about, which is how much they were wanted by their parents. And in my case, I'm very fortunate to be somebody who continues to have both of his parents on this earth, who always raised me with love, raised me with, a little sister who, as it came out, was also donor conceived.
Okay.
And it's possible we're not biologically full siblings, but our relationship is just the same. And so I had a chance to really kind of bask after the initial shock of it, bask in the fact that I was so desperately loved and wanted. And on top of that, I ended up with two new half siblings right out of the gate,
Yeah.
which was
Bonus
really
siblings.
really
I
cool.
probably, yeah.
Yeah, bonus siblings.
I mean, okay, maybe I shouldn't say that. Your terminology is so sensitive that I always want to respect what people say and not put something in. So
I am not easily offended. I know people struggle to explain it themselves. So I appreciate people who are willing to try and, understand what the right language is. And I'm still trying to figure that out myself. Yeah.
I guess I use the word bonus because I think in talking with donor conceived people in general, there's a mixture of feelings, like the whole topic, but in general, it can be a positive experience, or at least there's moments that are very positive.
Sure.
It may not stay positive. There's going to be, just like life, there's going to be, maybe a period where you drift apart again, or you find you don't have as much in common, or life just takes you in different directions, and that's completely normal. So, but that, and that when you touched on so wanted, and we've had discussions about this a lot with donor conceived people and recipient parents, that a lot of times recipient parents will say, why are you upset about being donor conceived? I mean, just your parents really wanted you. So there's this kind of like dominant narrative that says you should be grateful instead of have any negative feelings. And what I continue to emphasize on this podcast is that it's both. And that you just said that, is that you can actually feel that. What you just described is, I feel so wanted. And the parents are like, yeah, that's the thing, right? Because yes, it is. We just don't want to place that on you and say, hey, Dave, you should feel so wanted.
One of the ongoing challenges, I'll say, of like a discovery like this and subsequent ones, which I'm sure we'll get into, is that two seemingly like different truths going in the opposite direction can both be true at the same time.
Yes.
That there's something difficult and hard to emotionally navigate, and at the same time is a beautiful gift. And I at least was inclined previously to think of things as one or the other, and life rarely operates that way. And certainly in my situation and others like me, it's learning that two things can be true at the same time that may not seem like they could coexist.
Yeah, it's the dialectical thinking I talk about. They can exist at the same time, and that we can hold the tension between those two. And we know the media likes to polarize topics. They like to put them on in either or categories because it just sells more of what they're selling. But and I don't know how Nightline will present you, but do you feel like you've been fairly presented in these other big
I do, which
Good.
I'm really grateful for, because to your point, clicks are what are selling these days, which is conversation for another day. But why you see such a divided media world where people live in two different realities. But I think they did a lot of justice to the story, and I'm really grateful for that, because it is nuanced. It's not it's not a clickbaity headline, right? There's a lot of meat to it,
although it could be.
It is definitely a clickbait. Yeah.
And we'll tell you why. Well, I'll let you say why.
So after, discovering the two half siblings at the beginning, as it happened, one of them lives in New York City, and I had to be in New York City a couple of weeks later. I live in Miami, Florida now, but I had to be in New York City for a wedding. And so I had asked, I was like, I don't know if this is too forward, but 2 weeks from now I'll be in New York City. Would you want to meet up? And he said yes. And then my half sister had said, well, if you guys are both going to be there, I'd like to be there too. And so 2 weeks after discovering we were half siblings, all three of us met for the first time and spent a good chunk of that weekend together in New York City. And I was blown away. One of the things that is hard, and this is a cringy comparison, but but you'll have to stick with me.
Trigger warning.
Yeah, exactly. I feel a lot of similarities with like when you start dating somebody new, as like the feelings that you have when you meet your new half siblings. You want to make a good impression. You want them to like you, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And I know, I totally understand that. And that's not just, that's actually research has shown that to be a thing. And that I think it's really important to normalize that feeling, because it can feel like, whoa, like that's not, but we're not supposed to feel that way. But it is, a feeling that can come up, exciting, first love kind of, but it's not like romantic. It's just,
it wraps around, I think, acceptance and vulnerability and, new emotions that you're not familiar with. And
a commonality, like a connection that you have with that person that's special, and through genetics. Yeah.
That's a great point, because we all felt the significance of it, right? Like you're all of a sudden you're in your 30s and you're related to somebody like that close that you've never met. Like, you're right. It feels really significant. And people know, whether they had siblings or they didn't, what a sibling relationship should be like. And so you feel like, oh, is that what we have to be? Is that the expectation? And the truth is, I still don't know. Even, now several years later, I don't know what normal is, but I can say that first weekend was spectacular. I was delighted by the people that I happened to share this connection with. And I continue to this day to have a wonderful relationship with them. And I'm, incredibly grateful for that. But it also set into motion, at least at first, just some general questions. So they happened to both know, they grew up knowing they were donor conceived, and it was the one of the three who did not. So they knew the name of the fertility doctor who had helped their mothers. And, as it turns out, all three of our mothers had gone to the same fertility doctor, which didn't seem all that surprising, given the fact that we were born within a year of each other. That seemed possible. But it's, I would say it was the first time where at least I personally had some, questions about, well, who is that donor? Who is the person whose reflection I'm seeing half of, every day?
Okay.
And then fast forward to, I think it was the following August. So, a little over, or just about a year later, all three of our families, me and my two half siblings and their, mothers and children or whatever, all got together for a super family barbecue. And it was, it was one of the happiest nights of my entire life, just watching everything kind of come full circle. And then the next,
so cool.
And I know, sorry, I should have allowed us to stop and bask in that. But that collision of worlds and everybody just being so warm to each other was just like, this is a new normal, and I like this new normal.
See, there we go. Happy.
So there's your happy part. The next morning, however, my half brother woke up to a notification on his 23andMe account that he had another match, somebody who was very likely a half sibling to us. And as it turns out, that that girl, or woman, I should say, was a very close childhood friend of the first girl half sibling that we had.
What?
So essentially, and she has a twin sister. So in short version, to make a little more sense of it, these three girls grew up on the same street as each other from the age of 5 as closest friends all through high school, and come to find out in their early 30s were half sisters. And
that's the kind of stuff that parents, when they come talk to me before they use a donor, don't even think about. They, and I say, your kids could go to school with a half sibling and not know it. And they're like,
Right.
whoa. And then only the ones that maybe have thought of it say, oh, but the doctor says that's incredibly rare. I don't know that it's as rare as they think it is.
Yeah, especially in smaller cities.
Right.
And
Right.
and rare is very subjective too. That's why
That's true.
you need to quantify rare
Good
with
point.
certain people,
We
you
need
know.
data. Yeah.
Right. So
So, but
yeah,
that's incredible. And you're not the first. It's not the first story I've heard. Amazing.
it is. And at the same time, it was a little disorienting because for some reason I had like operated under the assumption that I just landed on New Earth and it was just, me and these two other people and this was it. And I'll fast forward through some of these, details here, but over the next, I'll call it 18 months to 2 years, we ended up getting up to 10 half siblings. And at this point, we had really significant growing suspicions about who it was our biological father and how we'd gotten here. And to spoil the ending a little bit, I'll skip over
Yeah.
some details, but ultimately I was able to connect with the fertility doctor, one of his known daughters, because I was so
Oh,
suspicious at this point that
you
I
were.
had,
Yeah.
and I believed it
Oh
was
my
not only
goodness.
possible, but very likely that the fertility doctor was our biological father.
And
She took, yeah,
was there a moment like that hit you and you were pushed the thought away? Like, no, that can't be the truth. Or did you
constantly pushed it away
constantly? Oh my gosh.
because in the beginning, right, like to
Oh,
think that out there in the very beginning, right, that you have two half siblings you've never met, that feels crazy. And then to
right.
get to a place, a couple of years later to think, not only do I have now, 10 or more half siblings, but the person who set this all in motion was the fertility doctor for all of our mothers. That just seemed so implausible. And,
Yeah.
a whole bunch of other
Yeah.
adjectives that are not positive. But
Right.
the results came back, and I and his known daughter that he raised were a 99.99% match as half siblings. And
Oh my
this was,
gosh.
and we got a second certified DNA test that confirmed that was our biological father.
Wow.
And so that was, but funny enough, it didn't have like the climactic finish,
Okay.
um, where like, oh wow, that's earth shattering. It is, but I think I had
Mm-hmm.
suspected it and spent time imagining it for so
Processing it.
long that
Okay.
it was actually almost validated when it happened, because I was like, all
Okay.
right,
Okay.
at least I'm not crazy, like.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. What's the other side? Were you angry? Were you, I, I mean, what kind of things, how did you deal with that?
This is I guess the reiterating the main theme of multiple things being true that don't seem to agree with each other. I
Yeah.
Part of me was uh, angry, not necessarily for myself, but more so for my mother, for our mothers, who,
Mm.
in the most intimate of settings, were lied to. And that
Yeah.
a lie is not even the beginning of it, because
No, no.
we as their children are a physical, living, breathing reminder every day of this thing that was done wrong to them, but at the same time is the source of, well, at least what my mom says, her greatest gift, is her children.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so both of
Yeah.
those things are living there. And then, here's another unfortunate twist to this story, but one of my half sisters, so this doctor, is a practicing physician still in gynecology in Rochester, and she has been a patient of his,
Oh,
for
gosh.
9 years prior to the discovery of this. And so, I mean,
And
I
he
don't,
had to have known.
I'm certain with every fiber of my being, because she told him along the discoveries that she was making, which, oh wow, I have, a couple half brothers. Oh wow, there's more half siblings. Like, but still, not until we had confirmation, like we all thought we were still crazy. And he had the opportunity to acknowledge or stop treating her or any of the above, and did not. So I'm angry for her. And at the same time, when I look at myself, I have to acknowledge that if I'm generally happy with myself, then a not small component of who I am is a
Mm-hmm.
product of him. And less than 2 weeks
Yeah.
after confirming that he was my biological father, my wife gave birth to our son, and I held my
Mm.
son for the first time, which is magnificent on its own. But I was reminded of the fact that his blood is in my son too. And
Yeah.
and that's something that, I can't undo, and that I do wrestle with that, all in all.
Do
But
you? Okay.
wrestle with it in the sense that it's there, but not wrestle with it in the sense that like there's something I'm going to do about it. And a word you used earlier
Yeah.
is acceptance. And acceptance, I don't think means just, putting your feelings aside and just saying,
No.
well, it is what it is, but
Yeah.
acknowledging that this is an unshakable truth. And that's where you have to start. It doesn't mean that the feelings that you have are good or bad or right or wrong. I think there's space for all of them in time, but you do have to accept that this is a foundational truth, and what you choose to do with it is ultimately up to you. And that for me,
Exactly.
yeah, I think the fact that I have a choice is the most important part. I have a choice in how I choose to navigate this. It is up to me.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely. And, there's so many inheritable, there's things that are inherited, there's things that are learned, and a combination of both. And there's things that are outside of your control. This was obviously very much outside of your control. And we can't fault ourselves or shame ourselves for something that we didn't control.
Right.
And, when we were little, I grew up in Montana, and we used to go to this area, and I can't remember now where, my dad would know, but we would do that like panning for
Oh yeah.
stones,
Sure.
like, so we get like the train. I think it was all set up, but at the time it seemed very real to me. I was a kid. So I'm sifting through, and you're letting like, it just looks like a bunch of dirt. And then as you sift through and let the water run through it, what you get left with is these stones that you're just so excited that you discovered, how lucky, even though it's probably part of it. I think of that when I think of taking on the traits of biological family that you either knew or you didn't know growing up, or you discovered later. Like in you and I's case, we discovered facts later. I was through adoption. Taking the traits that maybe you're not really so sure about, and letting that be the sand that just sifts through. And then
I
just
like
keeping
that.
the things that, those stones, those gems that stay on the top, like keeping that, because that's the part that you want to embrace and cultivate and focus on and grow and nurture.
It's great advice.
Yeah. So that's a way, right. I think there are a lot of people are going through that kind of. I remember when I was going to meet my birth father for the first time, or figure out who he was, I remember like, what if he's in prison? What if he's a murderer? Like, I don't know.
Right. You don't know. Yeah.
How will I make sense of that? And there's so many people. I was talking to a new friend the other day, and they shared with me that he was adopted. And he said, I'm afraid to open that door because I'm not sure what I'm going to find.
Mm-hmm.
And yet then there's this whole side of him he's denying because of fear. So we don't know what we're going to find, but it doesn't mean, again, it doesn't change us. It doesn't, like we're still who we are.
It's a very good point. And I think it's a great lesson for anybody. And I know that a big chunk of your listeners are people who have children who are, maybe adopted or donor conceived, or maybe some other quote unquote unconventional means. Right. But I think from that perspective, it is important to remind yourself that everything you just said about sifting through the, leaving out and nourishing, if you will, the nice stones is true for anybody. It's a universal truth. We all, regardless of like the origins, have things that on given days we like about ourselves, and things that we're kind of like, why this? I wish that I had a full head of hair and I was a little bit taller. It is what it is, right? But but that's acceptance, right? Like those things are not in the cards for me, but there's a lot in me that is good and capable. And and I think that's important for parents to remember, is that yes, the circumstance feels unique, but the life lessons within it are no different. And for me personally, I place a huge value on truth and honesty, which I understand why my parents, for example, withheld the information. I suppose if I were trying to conceive naturally or artificially, I suppose in the early 80s, then I might have had some secrecy too. But when and I feel it's especially now that I am a father, your job is not to, your child is not your property, even though for a period of time it probably feels like you have to control everything. You certainly do. But what you're raising is another person who's going to be their own person. And the same way that you expect and, think that you deserve truth and honesty from others around you. I mean, if you're raising a child, they deserve that too. I suppose my life would look a little different if I knew, a lot of this earlier in life. But I do know that I deserved to know, and I'm glad that I do. And I think that's one of the best gifts that you can give to your child is the truth, and nurture and support them while they navigate what that means.
Oh, I love that you said that. International Donor Conception Day is April 27th. And that's what we're encouraging people to do, is to be honest if they haven't yet, because there's still a tremendous amount of secrecy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And look, I mean, I'll take it a step further. And you started the show by saying you felt like you were being preachy. Now it's my turn. The truth part is the first part, but I think a big part of the reason, parents would continue to withhold that information is the fear of what they don't know. And what is really two things. Number one, if you've done a solid job in raising your child, in love, which I believe, I don't want to make it bold assumptions, but children who were, brought home through adoption or donor conception know more than most people that they were sought after. Right. So I will make an assumption that, a lot of those children were raised in love. So if you've done that, checkbox number one, I feel like your child is going to be, I don't deny them the opportunity or likelihood that they will have an emotional reaction, but the rebound off of that is that they will rest on that truth. And the second part is, for the things that you can't control. Number one, that's life, but the second part of it is there are an abundance of resources out there of, communities of people who are donor conceived or conceived through adoption, who share their stories with each other. And, a lot of these live in Facebook groups that are very easy to find, for example, and, probably numerous other resources that I'm not even aware of. But there's a world out there where your children can find comfort and support. And look, I'll say it very plainly too. I spent, a lot of time with my therapist in the first, days and weeks after the discovery for me too, not because I felt, broken or anything, but because I had a lot of new information that I didn't know what to do with. And sure. A therapist is helpful in that regard. So
yes. Yeah. And assimilating that new information into who you are and sifting through the sand and keeping the gemstones is part of that process, because there is a lot of assimilation into our identity to do, even when new siblings are discovered. Again, there might be traits that show up in a sibling that you don't have, or you have little pieces of, or you have little hints of. So each moment when you find a new sibling, you might go through that again. So I think talking through it is so helpful, and it can be such a blessing too, because you get these new pieces of information that can help you understand your behavior, or maybe why you respond a certain way to certain things.
Yeah. And feeling tethered to something is valuable as well. Like, talking about it's such a cliche, or at least it feels like one, but the things that stay in, is just kind of like mold that gets pushed under the carpet. Like, you might think that you put it away, but that's growing underneath, and it's not good. And that's, the truth, I think, with any secret, or even a feeling or an emotion that's not dealt with. True. And
it's so funny. I had a client asking me recently, like, and I liked how she was breaking it down. She's like, why do we need to process our emotions? Like, can't we just set them? And I'm like, I know, right? Why can't we just push them over there?
I like the question. I think it's a good question.
Like, I know. And do I have the answer? Heck no. I don't have the answer to why. I just know that for some reason we do have to feel it to heal it. Mm-hmm. I think you have to process it. Maybe that's the point of being here. Who knows?
It could be. Yeah. And look, there's other outlets too, right? Like, I was ready to talk. Maybe somebody is not. But at the same time, like a pen and pad, a keyboard is there. Like, you can write a lot of this out too. And I did that as well. You can find ways to, at least for me personally, my thoughts feel like a tornado in my mind, but when I write, I'm able to at least organize them a little bit more logically into something that makes sense. And there's that too.
That's a great point. And I think just being able to write it, and also not, your point to the not being ready too is important. So if somebody is just starting to contemplate these thoughts and feelings and need help just reconnecting or identifying, there's ways you can do that. So
Mhm.
whatever stage you're at is good. It's not saying everybody has to be like, boom, you got to go right into it and start feeling it.
Right.
No, not there's a process that leading up to that too. What would you say is, going to, being able to be open with your story and open with your identity? Tell me what led you to that, and what is your main what's the drive behind that?
Yeah, it's also a good question. I think for me originally, I actually do write for myself, and that was a vehicle for me to share my story, at least in my world, which is a lot smaller than the Good Morning America world. Um, but when those opportunities presented themselves, I think at first for me there was the shock of being donor conceived, the shock of having numerous half siblings, and then the wow moment of finding out it's your biological father is the fertility doctor. Are shock moments. But then on the other side of that was the recognition that, we talk a lot about acceptance, and sometimes that means accepting things that you're not particularly happy about, and you can want them to be different in the future. And so for me, look, there's going to be a lot of people who click on the articles, about me and my half siblings and my story, and say, well, that's crazy, or wow, that sucks. But there's also going to be a contingent of people who have some sort of identification with the story, maybe through adoption or donor conception, or have ever been in a position where they just didn't feel safe or comfortable in their physician's office. And so I mentioned that now, knowing that while I'm grateful that I am here and all my half siblings are here, how we got here is wrong. And so an important part of me telling the story is revealing to a contingent of people who are shocked, as I was, that this is not illegal in 41 states. And so I do think that fertility fraud legislation is important to me, not just to right a wrong, but also for accountability for our mothers who have not necessarily been given a voice. And frankly, maybe this is overstating it, but I also think in states that have not passed this legislation, they are implicitly endorsing a practice where women are not safe and protected in the one place that they really should be. And I can't think of a more vulnerable space for a woman than the gynecologist's office. And it shouldn't be that way. The second part of it is really accountability for my half sister, who was a patient of this physician in particular. And I know, unfortunately, that is an even more unique circumstance. So for me, it's about, giving a voice and a platform and where patients can find and not stopping until the other 41 states put something together that says, this is done. The next generation is not going to have this to deal with. And
yes. Because to assume that it's rare or it's not happening anymore or it's never going to happen again is a bit naive.
I think so.
I think, this practice of donor conception started as an experimental fertility treatment back, probably in the late 1800s even. And it was done under such a veil of secrecy that's why doctors were, and not just doctors, but staff at the physician's office, medical students, maybe the lab director, personnel they were getting the donations from them. And then lastly, I feel like we would leave the listeners hanging if I didn't ask you. I assume you have not met the physician.
Oh, that's correct. So I met him, nor do I intend to, but I have spoken to him.
I've spoken to him.
Yeah. So this, I had an opportunity. So when his known daughter took the DNA test and before the results came in, I recognized a small window of opportunity where I could, in theory, speak to him and maybe be able to get some answers from him before he knew that I had the answers. And so I sent him an email, and it was not related to this, but what I wrote him about was truthful, and that was, as I had mentioned, my son was born less than 2 weeks, after the results came in. So I would say it was probably about 3 weeks at this point before my son was born, and I had questions about the irony, right, that I was I received Ashkenazi Jewish, DNA through my biological father, but I don't identify as Jewish. Meanwhile, I married a woman who's adopted, who was raised Jewish, and
Oh,
may
wow.
not necessarily have that. So
Yeah.
so I, had thoughts of saying, like, I feel like an imposter trying to
Mhm.
raise my son in a Jewish environment, is what I, explained. And he was somebody who was and still is an outspoken voice, for the Jewish community in Rochester. So I sent him the note, and he called me within 30 minutes, actually, of me sending the email. And on the call, I had an opportunity to explain to him who I was, and I told him who I suspected he might be. And I tried to, as gently as I could and diplomatically as I could, say, I recognize what I'm suggesting would sound like a wild accusation. It's just something I believe might be possible. And now, mind you, if someone had, called out of the blue and suggested that, I had donated sperm and I was their father, I would say, well, no, that's not possible, because it never happened. Instead, he gave me something else to believe, which was a lot of Ashkenazi Jewish donors were, had fairer features with light eyes, which, is me. And, sorry that he couldn't be of more help, but, there's probably an explanation for it that way. And he went on to, to tell me about his ancestral history with, with his own family. This is a survivor, or he's the child of Holocaust survivors, who escaped Poland in World War II, and made their way to Ellis Island in New York. And we hung up the phone, 20 or so minutes later, and I didn't have confirmation, but after that phone call, I was totally sure that he was my biological father, because number one, he never denied that it was true. He just gave me something else he could believe. And number two, he spent a lot of time telling me about his family, and a level of depth that I don't think I would share with a total stranger, unless I felt like I was trying to tell them something without telling them something.
Yeah.
And that was it. And I was grateful for the conversation, even though I knew a lot more, than he knew that I knew. And so I have other misgivings about him. And for that reason, I don't desire any further communication. But my long answer is, yeah, I have spoken to him, and
Wow,
I can say that is done.
yeah. Yeah. That's a lot to
Yeah.
have experienced.
I'm glad that I did it.
Yeah.
I maybe went, too fast on some of this thing of just kind of blindly
Yeah.
diving into everything, but I don't regret it. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Any advice for anyone that's going through it, just discovering they were donor conceived through a DNA test?
Don't judge yourself, and be kind to yourself. There are no wrong emotions. There are no wrong ways to navigate it. You're going to feel some ways on one day, and not even the next day. Maybe within a couple hours, you're going to feel something, completely different. There's a lot to unpack, and there are no wrong feelings. You're entitled to feel, relieved or angry, or, or upset or lied to, or optimistic. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can come into it. There's no wrong feeling for it. But what I would say is, if you get to a point where you're navigating something that feels too big to lift on your own, don't go at it alone. At a minimum, write it out and try to make sense of those feelings in your own head, and talk to somebody. If you have other half siblings coming through it, they get it. If you don't, find communities of people who are also, like you, and you're going to feel a kinship and a safety with people like that. But there's no wrong feeling, was what I would say.
So true. And so good to say that, and remember that we started this by saying, kind of speaking to the recipient parents and saying, this is not we're not trying to beat you over the head with bad stories.
Right.
But I think to end by saying that at the same time, that if you are donor conceived and you're listening, that if you don't find any happy in this at all right now, that's okay too. So
Right.
you don't have to find any happy when you're in the deepest grieving part of this. It's hard to find any happy, and it's hard to believe you ever will. So
Right.
hopefully you and I have been given, today, David and I have given you some hope about that that happy can be found again through acceptance and processing and support, just all those things that you mentioned.
Absolutely. It's a process, but wherever it is you're hoping to get, you can and you will get there.
Yeah. Very good. So great to talk to you. It's been awesome.
You too. Thank you so much. I was delighted to be here, and
Yeah.
it's I'm really grateful that you're sharing the stories that you're sharing, and I appreciate being a part of it.
Thanks for listening. If you would like to follow me for more content, you can find me on Instagram at Jana Rupnow LPC and Facebook. And you can also grab a copy of my book, 3 Makes Baby, on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and Target.com. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and rate it and share it with a friend if you liked it. Have a great day.